Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to this Conservative European Forum webinar with Andrius Vyšniauskas, who will speak on NATO and the Ukraine, a viewpoint from the Baltic countries. This meeting is on the record, and Simon Sanders, who is in charge of the technical side, has two requests. Could you please mute your microphones? I can hear that somebody hasn't. Except when called upon to ask a question. It's recommended that you choose the speaker view and in your choice of viewing how you see this broadcast. If you'd like to ask a question, please do use the chat function or virtually raise your hand, not use the Q&A facility, and you'll then be called upon to ask your question live. So I'm really pleased to welcome my friend Andrius. Perhaps the best political outcome of all for my generation was to see so many European countries gain their political freedom after a rather unsatisfactory result of the Second World War, including, of course, Lithuania. Now, Lithuania still has two testing immediate neighbours, Belarus and Russia's Kaliningrad enclave, but that puts Lithuania's democracy in the very front line of freedom. That said, Andrius, as most of your audience this evening was growing up, it really would have been beyond our wildest dreams that Lithuania would rejoin free Europe, let alone host a NATO summit in Vilnius, or indeed have a Christian Democrat member of the Seimas speaking to CEF. From 2011, Andrius was an assistant focused on youth policy to a greatly respected leader in EPP's family, Andrius Kubilius, then the Prime Minister of Lithuania. And after the 2020 election, Andrius remained as assistant to Mr. Kubilius when he became the leader of the opposition. For 5 years, and this is a career pattern many of your audience tonight will recognise from the Conservative Party, until 2020, Andrius was a councillor in Mariampole and chairman of the Anti-Corruption Committee, as well as being head of campaigns for his party, Homeland Union, Lithuanian Christian Democrats. Himself elected to the Seimas in 2020, he's deputy chair of Homeland Union, Lithuanian Christian Democrat political group, a member of the Committee on European Affairs, and a member of the Committee on Legal Affairs. Andrius, we very much look forward to your opening comments.
Thank you, Dirk, for this very generous introduction. I would like to add something from myself about myself, who I am and why I'm speaking today. My academic background is in political science. As a student at two prominent Lithuanian universities, I was and still am interested in the development of political systems in Central and Eastern Europe. After my studies, I worked as a political and communication advisor. You mentioned for Andrius Kubilius, Gabrielius Landsbergis, who was the opposition leader at that time, and now he is the Minister of Foreign Affairs. 3 years ago, I was elected as a member of Seimas, and my party, Homeland Union, Lithuanian Christian Democrats, is the biggest political group in the parliament. We are conservatives with very solid roots in the anti-communist independence movement. And I'm the whip of our political group, so it's my primary responsibility in the parliament just to count the votes, to see what's happening with our laws, reforms, and other important issues. Of course, it's an honor to be here and to speak with you about NATO, Ukraine, and the view from Baltic states, from Lithuania and all the regions. NATO is extremely important for Lithuania and other Baltic countries. I think it's the backbone of our independence and security. Lithuania as a sovereign entity has existed for 1,000 years. Wars with Russia, occupations, rebellions, revolutions, independence, and new imperial occupations of the Russian Empire mark our history's recent 500 years. The constant struggle with Russia characterized our statehood. The same story applies to Ukraine. When the struggle began 500 years ago with the rule of Ivan the Terrible in Moscow, Lithuania and Ukraine were one country, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. For those 500 years, we always looked after each other and looked to the West for help. Looked to the Poles, the Germans, Austrian Empire, Napoleon's France, Great Britain, and of course, in recent times, United States of America. British forces were the most crucial ally during our independence war in the interwar period. At that time, British Navy had our backs. You blocked Bolshevik forces from attacking our shores from the Baltic Sea. It was a big thing for all Baltic states. It was one of the key elements of our successful in the war for independence. After 90s, when we restored our independence, you helped us to recreate our military and speed up our accession to NATO and the EU. Now, NATO guarantees our security, and we are confident that when Russia decides on a new military adventure in a foreign country, NATO will be there for us. I'm confident for this, and the event, the NATO summit, reassured us very much. I have no doubt that Russia will do something bold, unexpected, and stupid in the Baltic states one day. I'm not saying that it will happen tomorrow, next week, next year, but one day we must be prepared for something bad. And our history proves that Russia never changes. Russia must be contained in its corner of the world. This is our primary goal if we want to live free for the next 500 years. The same story is in Ukraine. Ukrainian people define their identity and statehood through their constant struggle against the Russian Empire and dreams of integration into the West. The difference between Ukraine and the Baltic states grew bigger during this interwar period, during First World War and the Second World War. We were luckier to gain independence and West-oriented state. That helped us to cherish Western values and to form solid Western democratic identity. Ukraine did not manage to take this step towards the West then in this interwar period. Still now we can see how Ukraine defines itself as a Western country and society during two revolutions and decade-long war with its historical enemy, Russia. We can see how European flags of European Union is raised on the trenches in this war. So this is important to see this thing. And in practical terms, we can see that their military is becoming fully integrated in the NATO standard system. Their economy works on a free market basis with the EU single market. There is no tariffs or other control mechanism from the EU. Ukraine's economy works as a normal part of the EU's economy. Because of the war, Ukraine non-officially integrated in the EU's economic, fiscal, and energy system in 1 year. So why they are not in the EU officially? Because we are afraid of Putin. Does he have some kind of veto in the EU? Of course, it's not the questions for you, for UK, it's the questions for us in the European Union. But you can see that this debate is happening. Europeans have accepted millions of Ukrainian refugees and nothing terrible happened. In Lithuania, we took some 90,000 refugees. It compares with 4% of our population. We did this in 1 year, and nothing bad happened, just good things, more empathy in our society, more understanding, and more workforce for our economy. I'm speaking about migration and refugees because I know that some countries in the European Union are afraid of this big influx of Ukrainian immigrants if we accept them in the Western organization. But in Lithuania, we managed to solve the problem of the refugee, and we don't see any problems with their migration. Of course, there are some issues with corruption, oligarchs, and the democratization of Ukraine. But if you think that the situation in other post-communist countries was very different before the membership in the EU and NATO, you are very, very wrong. Before 2004, when Lithuania joined NATO and European Union, in Lithuania, we also had problems with oligarchs, corruption, Russian influence, and even issues with our military commanders. We even impeached our president at that time when we joined the EU and NATO because of his corrupt ties with Russian oligarchs. That president was basically bribed by Russian special forces, and we impeached that president. At the same time, we joined NATO and the EU. Despite that, we have managed to transform. Our integration with NATO and the EU was the main reason for this transformation to happen. The integration was and still is the main driving force for positive reforms. This is the reason why we must start Ukraine's accession to both clubs. We must understand that the accession and the membership, all the transformation for NATO and for European Union is not as a one-time thing. You know, you join and you are a member. No, you join and you constantly reforming yourself, trying to be the part, trying to reach some kind of goals. You know, Lithuania is still integrated to the both clubs for 20 years now, but we are not still in that goal that we are fully integrated. It's a process. It's a process how you transform yourself. This leads me to a few last remarks about the NATO summit in Vilnius. For us, for Lithuania, this summit was success. It was very well organized and everything was very, very smooth. In this summit, the leaders have even made some truly historic decisions. New NATO defense plans for Baltic states, for us, it's very important. The increased military presence of Canadian troops in Latvia, it's very important. I hope that UK government could increase their numbers in Estonia, just short remark. And of course, the agreement on Sweden's membership in NATO. It's a very historic things, and we hope that everything will happen soon, the Swedish membership. All those things are essential and they are our success as well. But the problem in the summit was the indecision on Ukraine. The text of the summit resolution is weak and non-understandable. Of course, Ukraine won some victories on sidelines like more military aid and the creation of NATO-Ukraine Council, but in general, we had expected more from the summit. We understand that it is not possible for Ukraine to join NATO today, but we have hope for more robust language and the invitation to join soon. This is important not just in practical terms, but as a symbol that the West cares about Ukraine's success. The symbol for Ukrainian people that they are fighting for an achievable dream. They need this symbol, they need this language, they need this goal. They need to see that one day they will achieve all those dreams to become EU member, NATO member, OECD member, and all the other clubs in the West. This dream is just basically the dream to be in the West, not in the East. So thank you very much. It's my my first word, and I can answer your questions about history, politics, everything you care about.
Well, thank you so much, Andrius. Thank you partly for your very generous remarks about the UK's historic role in helping to get Lithuania back in the West where you belong. Thank you very much for that. They were times that most of your audience this evening well remember, and some of your audience were active participants in that. You demonstrated, if I might say so, the sure sign of a professional politician from a democratic country, which is you stuck to your allotted time. And I think there is a sort of rule of politics: the shorter the speech is, the more democratic the country. But thank you for that. I mean, there was much in what you're going to say, much in what you said, and I can see the questions starting to come in. But I'm going to use, if I may, the chairman's prerogative to ask you, it's sort of two questions, but in a way it's one. For the first time, and this is different really since our very unfortunate referendum in 2016, the European Union budget line contains one on defence for the European Defence Fund, and that complements the 2021 European Peace Facility. And this isn't really the issue that it was when the UK was a member state, because with Australia and Ireland being the non-NATO members of the EU, and Ireland probably going to join the NATO in any event, there is very close alignment between the EU and NATO in a way that wasn't always the case before. And now here's the sting in the tail. Can Serbia, which isn't even near to being a member of NATO, realistically join the EU? Yes.
about Serbia. No, I don't think so. I don't believe that Serbia can join EU. The same story is with for example, Turkey. But I hope that one day we will see some other Balkan states in the EU. I hope to see northern Macedonia. I hope to see Montenegro one day, Albania, and even Kosovo. Of course, Kosovo can join with Serbia. It's connected thing. But the problem with Serbia is that this country is very pro-Russian. The elite, not all the elite, the part of the elite is quite pro-Western, but the majority, the president, the ruling clique, they are very, very pro-Russian, and the society is quite pro-Russian, and that's why it's a problem. And you know, I'm a politician, so I'm parliamentarian, so I can speak freely. If Serbia decides to join European Union and steps forward for that, I think Lithuania could even veto their membership, because you know we have Hungary. So we don't want to have a second Hungary in the EU. For us, it's very important thing. But the Ukraine is the number one. Ukraine, Moldova must join before all other countries joining in the EU. And about defense, about EU budget, it's good that EU has some line for defense. It's very good for Ukraine because we are buying some weapons as a block for them. I think it will be good for European defense industry, because we are starting to discuss about increasing capacities of our industry. So some subsidies, some help for that would be very good. In this regard, EU steps are quite okay, but we as a country, we don't believe in EU, in army of European Union or something like that. Why? Because we think that for defense purpose there is NATO, and NATO is the main main thing here. So spending on defense from EU is good, but we cannot see some kind of military or something like that from the EU side.
Thank you very much. I think many members of CF will find that a very useful and reassuring answer. One aspect of which leads on to David Lidington, the chair of CEF, who part of your answer was almost an invitation for him to speak because he's such an expert on the Western Balkans. David, would you like to ask your question and commentary if you wish?
Thanks very much, Dirk, and thank you, Andrew, for giving up time to talk to us today. I was actually not going to ask you about the Western Balkans, but about your next door neighbor, Belarus. I remember, I think it was my first visit to Lithuania as Britain's Europe Minister in about 2011, going to visit Prime Minister Kubilius and him telling me that he had just come back from a cycling holiday in Belarus, where he'd been touring around Belarusian castles and other historic sites, and it was encouraging me to take advantage of this opportunity. And of course, things have changed hugely since then. We thought, at one point, Lukashenko might be leaning westwards. Then, obviously, what has happened has happened. My question is really this: how secure do you think his regime is now? Or does change in Belarus rely on change taking place in Moscow first? And does Belarus, either in itself or simply as an ally and base for Russia, pose a threat to NATO? And if so, are we doing enough about it? And what should the West's approach to the regime in Minsk now be?
Yeah, thank you. It's very good questions. I will start with this famous road trip of my former boss, Andrius Kubilius. I was his boss at that time. In the summers, he has this thing. He cycles around the country with a bicycle, or sometimes in Ukraine. Of course, now he's a member of European Parliament, so he cycles in Belgium, France, in very beautiful places. And in 2011, I think, or 12, he decided to have this road trip in Belarus. At that time, Lithuanian and Belarusian relationship had some kind of a spring moment, softening of language from Lukashenko. He showed that he wanted to have some kind of connection and debate with the West. We hoped a lot for the elections because he gave some thoughts that he could have more democratic elections for the parliament and for the presidential election. So it was a strange situation. Of course, at the moment, the situation is very different. Basically, Lithuania as a country, we don't have any normal diplomatic relations with Belarus. And last week, we had this incident on the border when, Minsk regime, they are constantly sending some migrants from Middle East to Lithuania. And they sent one migrant in a lorry truck as a driver, and our border guards, they saw that the name and the picture on his passport is different. So they stopped him, and he was waiting on the borderline, on the border crossing, for I think 3 or 4 days. Because Belarusian guards, they refused to take him back, and he was standing. We are giving him food, and he's standing there, and there was no connection, no response from Belarusian authorities. We are sending notes, we are sending some messages, we are trying to call, nobody is answering. So this is the situation which we are with them. About the security. Of course, we are not very secure in that sense that, you know, we have Wagner troops in Belarus. We have nuclear weapons in Belarus. Of course, it's not new for us. We had, and I think we have some nuclear missiles in Kaliningrad too. So it's not new for us, but you know, it's a new threat. We're still having some hybrid attacks with this migration flows from Belarus, but of course now we have this big fence and it's easier to solve this problem. Of course, Lukashenko will change when he will die, and eventually he will die one day. He's not very young. He has no obvious successor. He has some sons, but those sons are not very strong. So Moscow will support someone. I don't know who that will be. But good thing about Belarusia, in comparison with the Russia,
they let me in so we can have it all in front of us out there.
Yes, they have very they have some kind of civil society. You know, we have big diaspora in Lithuania. Their people are constantly crossing our border. Each day it's more than some few thousand of people are crossing Belarusian Lithuanian border. So they're traveling, they seeing Western countries, they seeing Lithuania, they're shopping here. So they have different opinion. And what we saw in I think 3 years ago or 2 years ago, when this some kind of revolution started with Tsikhanouskaya movement, it was very natural, it was very big, and I think it could be repeated when Lukashenko will be out of the office. So I have hopes for Belarus, but at the moment nobody knows what to do with Belarus. So about Belarus.
Thank you very much, Andrius. It's perhaps just worth making the comment because you know, you're in the EPP family and you're in good company here. That Belarus, Albania, which you mentioned earlier, and Georgia all have very high quality people participating inside the EPP. I mean, they're very strong friends of democracy. And I'm going to invite John Bowies next, and after that, Nicholas MacLean and Peter Bassett. But first of all, John Bowies, who was a member of the European Parliament, and then he was a member of Parliament in Battersea and a minister in a Conservative government, and he's one of the good guys, Andrius.
Thank you, Dirk, for that salutation. And thank you, Andrius, for your words to us. Obviously, you spoke to us about the illustrious past of Lithuania, as you said, carrying through Poland and Ukraine, influencing the whole region over many centuries ago. And in the parliament, one of my colleagues was Vitas Landsbergis, who was always kept your history and your present state in front of us in the parliament. And I'd just like to remind myself of the one visit I made to Vilnius and going to the radio station and seeing outside that the photographs of the young people who were killed when Lithuania attempted to leave the Soviet Union and fortunately didn't develop any much worse than that. But it's a reminder that you are on the border, and I just wonder how much you are reassured by the arrival of Finland and Sweden into NATO as soon as maybe, and whether that is something that stands in the people of Lithuania in good stead in their own imaginings.
Thank you very much. It is very good good question. NATO, Finland and Sweden is very important for us. Firstly, it's very important because they are very strong partners of our country. You know, Sweden, they heavily invested in Lithuania. We have all the Swedish banks here. We have a lot of investment. We have very historical ties. They helped us after independence. Everything is good. With Finland, is quite the same story. They are very important for us, and those both countries, they have quite strong military. Of course, Sweden needs to increase their capacity, needs to increase their budget, but Finland is very strong. You know, they have big budget, a lot of weapons, good personnel, a lot of servicemen, etc., etc. So for us, it's important, and it's important that those two countries, they have very good navy. They can defend Baltic Sea, and they have very good air force. And the air defense is the main thing for Baltic countries. Why? Because air defense is one of the it requires a lot of money. And we are not very rich countries. That's why we need help in this regard. So Sweden and Finland, they have very strong capabilities in this regard. So now we see that Baltic Sea is basically some kind of lake of NATO. Everything is around. So for Russia to invade us from the Baltic Sea, it could be basically impossible. About other reassurances, very important thing happened in this NATO summit. Those new plans how NATO will defend Baltic countries. Why they are important? Before that, we knew that NATO will come in 3-4 days, something like that. That we will need to defend our border, our territory for 2, 3, or even 4 days. So everything was counted on this thing, to be prepared for 3 or 4 days. But in history, we had some reassurances, some historical moments when nobody came. That's why some people in our society, they thought that, you know, it's not reassuring. Now we have reassurances and the plans how NATO will defend Baltic countries from the first minute of invasion. That means that NATO will have capabilities in our countries. In Lithuania, there will be capabilities of German troops. I was visiting a few months ago what they are doing in Ruklais, in the middle in Lithuania, this small town. They are basically building some kind of military city there. It's very, very unique, very technologically advanced. So they are preparing, and we have reassurances, we have agreement that they will send technical things like tanks and live personnel here in Lithuania. The same story is with Latvia and Canadian troops. I hope that in the near future we will have the same reassurances for Estonians, because Estonia will be defended by the UK. But at the moment, they don't have your troops. So please encourage your government to send troops and to do the same things as Germans are doing and Canadians are doing in Lithuania. And one interesting thing about those troops, for us, it was very unexpected when Germany decided to send the 4,000 troops to Lithuania. Of course, we negotiated for that, but the moment was unexpected. We thought that it will be, some 2 days before the summit. And after that, we understood why they did this, because they had the information that Canadians will send additional troops before the summit. So they wanted to be first, to send the first message. So now, UK must do something like that, because the question about troops in Estonia was very hard for your prime minister during the NATO summit. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. Well, set against that, I helped Matt Lahr set up the capital markets in Estonia early in the 1990s, so that's a plus. But I think David Liddington, our chair, who also runs RUSI, the defence think tank, would have picked up your first hint, sir, on Estonia. But I think we've all picked up your subsequent hint on Estonia, so thank you for that. Nicholas, it's your turn, I think, and then Peter Bassett.
Thank you very much. I was traveling in Lithuania last month, from Vilnius to Kaunas and right down the Curonian spit to Nida, to the Russian frontier. So I wondered if you could comment on the security implications, if any, of the Kaliningrad exclave, both for Lithuania and for NATO.
With Kaliningrad, the Kaliningrad is basically big military compound, big military base. All those people who are living there, they are descendants of the military personnel. They have a lot of weapons, some Iskander missiles, maybe even some nuclear missiles, and etc., etc. But because we know the situation, and it's not very new for us, we always prepare for that. We have our military capabilities near the border. All the major military drills are going there, so we are constantly monitoring, and we have some reassurance. Of course, there is some weak points. One weak point is the defense of our coastline, because, as I mentioned, Lithuania is not a very rich country. That's why we are putting our money to the ground troops, not to the Air Force or Navy. So we have just 2 or 3 Navy ships, basically some demining capabilities. So the defense of the coastline is some kind of problem. We are trying to solve this problem with Sweden's help, and we hope in the future to have some help from Poland, because Poland will have, I think, in 10 years, they will have the strongest army in the European continent, because of their investment, because of their commitment, and some other things. So Kaliningrad is a problem, but they have some problems too. For example, one big problem is with energy facilities. Lithuania is trying, at the moment, our electricity is on the same grid as Russian grid. It's the Soviet thing. It's in some kind of international commitments. But next year, Lithuania will desynchronize from Soviet grid and will be synchronized to the European grid. And the question: what will happen with Kaliningrad? Because they are in our system, they are part of our electricity grid. From our side, we don't care. It's your problem. We will be in the EU, in that grid. If Kaliningrad wants, we can synchronize you with the European continent. So you will be the part of the continental grid, and some rules, some transparency, etc., etc. But for the Russians, it's a big problem. Why? Because in Kaliningrad, they don't have nuclear power plants, they have nothing. Just some small facilities for electricity from gas or from coal. But now when NATO is big around the Baltic Sea, we can, in the case of war, we can basically block Kaliningrad from that. So it's a problem. The second thing is this transit corridor to Kaliningrad, from Russia, Belarus to Kaliningrad. We have this international agreement with Russia that we must allow all the transit from Russia to Kaliningrad and back with trains and with cars. And the problem from our part that this agreement is the part of our agreement with the European Union when we decided to become members. It's written in that agreement. So basically, we don't have agreement with Russia, but we have agreement with European Union that we will allow transit from Russia. So it's very complicated. We had this issue last year's this debate, and we allowing the transit, but at the moment we have this new thing that we are controlling what's going with those trains. No weapons, no technologies which can be used for military and civil purpose. So we controlling what's happening with that. And on the ground, there is no big problem, but as a country, we have this not very tasty moment with this transit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Next is Peter. Peter Bassett.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrius. I have a question, because I was confused by the Ukrainian stance as set out by President Zelensky at the start of the NATO summit. And my question is as follows: since Ukraine wants to join NATO as soon as possible, could it accept that for the current conflict, the existing members of NATO would merely continue to supply arms rather than engage with in armed conflict against Russian forces on Ukrainian territory? Or does Ukraine want NATO forces to join the current conflict?
Thank you. It's a very good question. You know, I think Ukrainians, they want everything, whatever they can get. You know, if they can get weapons, they will get weapons. If they could get troops, they want troops. They want to win the war. But of course, they are rational people. They understand that they won't be members today, as I mentioned. They understand this thing, but they need reassurance. They need some kind of goal when they will be members, how they will join. You know, they are politicians. They need to show for their people that, you know, the process is going to the good direction. They are on good railroad. That moment when Zelensky said that you know, that we need commitment from the EU, we need to be part of the EU, we need this assurance that we will join. Yes, the language was quite harsh, but you must understand, you know, you are politicians. You saw many debates, many negotiations that in this part of the European continent, these countries, Lithuania, Baltic states, Ukraine, Poland, because of our situation, because that we are near the Russia, we always took some kind of radical position in the negotiations. We are always on the sidelines, and this is our our position. This is how we showing that we need solutions, that we need to be in the some kind of part of the decisions, etc., etc. Is the modus operandi of ours, and this is because our societies are quite radical in the sense of Russia. It's in Lithuania. It's very strong. The different story, for example, in Latvia, where they have a big minority of Russian-speaking people, but in Lithuania, more than 90% are for Ukraine. We don't have any resilience or other problems with that. Everybody is still supporting, giving money. Some volunteers are going to Ukraine. So this is the modus operandi of ours, and we understand all the implications. We understand all the political games, negotiations, etc., etc. But we must take all those radical stands. We think that this is our thing, and this is how we show for Macron, Scholz, and other leaders who are basically, from our understanding, is too weak, what need to be done. So I think that I answered, if it's
yeah,
okay.
No, that's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. What I'm going to do, if I may, is slightly adapt a question that Mr. Smith has asked on the chat. I mean, he says that you mentioned Hungary. He correctly says you mentioned Hungary, but notes that the current political climate in Hungary is not particularly unique, with Italy moving to the right, changes in the political composition of Sweden, and France looking, settling Madame Le Pen, I would imagine, being more confident than she's been before. He asks if the EU will resist this swing to populism, but if I may, I'd like to slightly recast that question, because at the last CEF meeting, we were addressed by the outgoing Secretary General of the EPP, Tono Istúriz White, and he was saying, really, I think, with the Spanish elections in mind, to be honest, he was saying that looking forward across Europe, we've got to look again at the relationships between some of the political strands. And you're very well placed in your party, actually, to comment on this, because he said, do we really want there to be such firm lines between classic liberals, Christian Democrats, and conservatives? So, in mindful of Mr. Smith's question about resisting populism, which comes from the left as well as the right, of course, in Europe, how do you see Christian Democrats, liberals, and conservatives moving forward?
Yes, thank you very much. Firstly, about Hungary. It's very sad what's happening in Hungary, and I think nobody knows what to do with Hungary, because the problem is their society and their political class. We're seeing elections from elections that nothing changes, no real opposition. And I have some friends and some I know some politicians from Hungarian opposition. They are in some kind of depression. They don't know what to do. So it's very sad. Of course, now EU, some big countries, Germany, even US, they are trying to push Orban to the good direction. In the end, he always goes with the flow, like with this veto on Sweden's accession. It was very interesting with this veto on Sweden. Orban was vetoing the accession of Sweden because he thought that Erdogan will do the same. But when Erdogan, the leader of the Muslim world, decided, just okay, Sweden will be in NATO, the Orban, who is the main Christian guy, Christian politician in the European Union, said, you know, if Orban okay, we are okay. No, what you gonna do, you know? So in this context, it's very funny. About far right parties and center right. Yes, we see that some far right parties are raising in the polls. They are winning some elections and they are becoming part of the governments. They say this story is in Sweden. This story is in Finland. The story is in Italy. The story will be in Spain after this weekend, and in the future in other countries. But we must understand that the far right is not similar in all the countries. From our perspective, we see, I can say this, good far right and bad far right. Good far right are those countries who are playing by the traditional rules of politics and who are not supporting Putin, who are not Putinists, who are supporting Ukraine. And when we seeing this leadership of Italy, brothers of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, from our perspective, it's not very bad. You know, they have some kind of I will say not very politically correct, some kind of fetish, you know, about some issues. But in international politics, they are very okay. Even on some fiscal policy, on economical policy, in EU context, they are very good. They are very, very strong. And if you're comparing with EPP member Berlusconi's party, you know, they were very pro-Russian. So it's not similar. The same story, I think, is with the Vox in Spain. They are quite okay in this regard, that they are supporting Ukraine. Swedish Democrats, they managed to moderate. At the moment, we are seeing that they don't have some kind of connection with Putinist parties, Putinist movements. We're seeing what's happening in Finland. Very strange debate and strange political narrative about new coalition. But the prime minister from EPP, Petteri Orpo, is very, very good. He's very, very good. So, but he has this coalition. So the far right is not the same all around the countries. And I see their debate about some kind of united force, united movement, but they cannot agree. For example, Meloni said that she won't be at the same political group with Le Pen. Vox won't be with the Le Pen. So we must play with those parties, with those resentments, and I think we need to accommodate those parties to the governments. Why? Because when those parties are in governments, then their numbers are going down, you know, and normal center right going up. The same story was in Norway. The same story was in Finland 10 years ago when they were in governments. The same story was in Italy with the League and with some other countries. So we must play with them because they are part of our political system. And what you gonna do?
Okay,
So I hope that I answered the question.
No, it does. Thank you very much. We have a question here that I think may be too far out even for you, Andrius. It's from Terry and Siri Edwards. Do you envisage NATO establishing a naval base in Sebastopol and a wider military presence in the Crimea? No, actually,
I will try to answer this. Let's imagine Ukraine joining NATO and European Union one day. What will happen? One thing, that the power balance from the West will shift to the East. Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine would be the biggest block of this of European forces. Now, two big countries with big military. Ukraine, after the war, Ukraine will have huge military capability. I think they will be the first military. They will have the biggest military capabilities in all the Europe. The Polish military will be the second. So I hope in this regard that we could see some kind of military base in Sevastopol, in Yalta, on Black Sea. I hope for that, and I hope that Ukrainians will win, because I know that this solution with some kind of negotiations, it's not possible in Ukrainian case. You know, as I mentioned, Lithuania and Ukraine was one country. We know that. We know them. You know, the old they have this Cossack emotion. You know, how they are thinking. They won't agree to give some territory of their to do something like that. And the President Zelensky, he said that if there will be some kind of a negotiation, all those things which will be agreed must be ratified by the referendum of the people. So it's impossible to have some kind of a negotiation project. The only solution is the victory on the battle.
Well, that's a very clear answer. Thank you very much for that. I think we, the British, are slightly cautious about the Crimea. We didn't do unambiguously well there in the 19th century ourselves at the height of our powers. So you're very bullish indeed on that. All good things must come to an end. I'm going to have to apologize, I'm afraid, to those who have asked questions on the chat.
I have time if you have. So,
well, I think we have to promise people to end promptly at 7. What I was actually going to say, Simon, are we going to be able to see this again online, this meeting?
Yes, it's going to be recorded and we'll upload it to the CEF website shortly. Because
I think there's been so much substance in what you've said, Andrius, that I think it's going to be very difficult for me as chair to fairly summarize everything you've said, because you have clearly been so authoritative and well informed on every single aspect on which you've been asked. And I very much hope we can look forward to your being in a leadership position, even more of a leadership position in your country sooner rather than later, not least because you were so kind about your country. I did sort of get the impression that if the UK were to see sense again and look again at the European Union, you would not be one of those voting to veto our relationship with the European Union if we get closer in time. And there is actually, you were a bit critical, I can understand why, about the Vilnius communique, but paragraph 30 actually has quite interesting wording, because it calls for a stronger defence industry in Europe and greater defence industrial cooperation within Europe and across the Atlantic. And that's reinforced in paragraph 36, which envisages NATO as a standard setter, which is always key in defence, for industrial capacity. So as part of this rather disorganised thanking you, can I say that as far as you're concerned, Europe very firmly includes the UK?
Yes, of course. UK is very important for us in all the regards, in the economy, in the military capabilities. And, you know, the EU, when Brexit happened, EU is not the same, you know. We need, we always had this coalition with the UK. Why? Because you always been some kind of, you know, hawks in the European Union on defense, on the values, on sanctions, etc. That's why now it's not easy for us. Now we have this coalition of Baltic, Nordic countries with Poland, etc., etc. But we need one more big country, and without UK, it's not the same. That's why UK is very, very important for us. That's why we will support all the things you will agree with the EU. If you need some kind of support on I know, new membership of the EU, we could help. You know, we need it.
Thank you very much. And I think in a way, good votes of thanks do give the last word to the speaker. So thank you very much indeed for that. Can I just tell people that there are going to be two forthcoming events after the summer holiday. It's the webinar with Antonio Lopez-Istúriz. He actually spoke to CEF in London very recently, but he'll be speaking on the 13th of September about the Spanish elections. And then we've got a CEF reception with Rory Stewart on the 27th of September. And you're nodding, Andrius. It sounds like you know who Rory Stewart is.
Yes, I know.
It will certainly be... he'll certainly speak candidly and entertainingly, and David clearly agrees. Everybody's agreeing. But what we all agree on, Andrius, is thank you so very much for giving us such a superb closure to our summer programme, and we hope to hear from you again very soon. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. I hope to be invited to your online events, because your topics are quite interesting, and I know a little bit about Rory Stewart. He is very interesting guy. I think I read his book about his travels somewhere in the Middle East. So hope to see you soon in some kind of similar meetings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.